What's up,
So
guys?
this game
Today we're
starts
gonna be
off with the
looking at
normal
about how
e4,
Hans Niemann
e4.
beat Hikaru and Magnus Carlsen in a row in a recent Title Tuesday, and we're also gonna be looking at how Magnus Carlsen got his
So this game
revenge
starts
in
off with
this
the
recent
normal
Title
e4,
Tuesday. So let's get
e5
started.
combination. Wait, let's just restart. So this game starts off with the normal e4, e5 combination. I mean, like it like opens up the bishop, the white squared bishop, and the dark squared bishop for Hans, and you already know all the basics. So then, the both players play knight to f3 and knight to c6, attacking and defending the pawn. Then, um, Hans on Twitch plays bishop to c4. This is the Italian defense right here. So, um, Magnus Carlsen gets his black knight out, and then both players just develop their pieces. This is a normal move because then it can get this bishop into this black diagonal, and it can be developed here. That's why Magnus Carlsen brung his bishop out, so if they try to trade, then the knight won't be pinned to the queen. So then we go with knight to c3. This is all developing, like this is all normal right here. Like, this is all like a normal move set. And then Magnus Carlsen castles, and then a3 to prevent knight to b4, and then this is to open up the white squared bishop and to defend this pawn. And then this is all just normal development here. This is to stop this, and this is to maybe castle longwise, and then this is, and that's what Hans does. And this is actually not a normal starting off. Like this is all normal here. Even this is not that normal. You would normally bring it to c5, what Magnus Carlsen does, because now the bishop is trapped. But this is really not normal. Like I don't think there's any games that where a person moves queen to d2. So Hans on Twitch does play queen to e2. I'm at e2, by the way. He does move queen to e2, then bishop to e6 is what Magnus Carlsen plays, invoking like a trade. This might double pawns, but it's not that big of a deal because it opens up the f file to Magnus Carlsen's rook. Then Hans on Twitch does this really irregular move. Like this is like way off. Like you would normally castle this side, but Hans on Twitch, or that's his username. Like this is his username right here. Hans on Twitch castles long ways, which is not really normal. So then both players just develop pieces. Magnus Carlsen moves his queen here so he can stack up queen and rook, or to centralize his rooks. Rook to g1, empowering to do a pawn attack on the queen side. I mean on the king side. And then knight to g4 is what black plays here, trying to threaten to take this bishop right here. And Hans on Twitch just says let him take it. Even though that bishop seems really powerful, and it is, but Hans on Twitch just lets him take it because I'm pretty sure he thought the knight would be bigger trouble. So, but they trade pieces, and here Hans on Twitch trades with the pawn, which is okay. I mean he trades with the pawn for a reason. I mean like it opens up the f file to his rook, then he can launch an attack with. And in this case, a double pawn's not that bad because if they trade out one of the e pawns, then it's not going to be that bad anymore. And then a4, Magnus Carlsen trying to push this pawn. Oh, then bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the queen. Queen to c6, d4, attacking the center. This is all normal moves. This is a very natural move because you have all that defense and you want to get rid of that double pawns. So this is a very natural move. Magnus Carlsen here just moves his knight because it's a very like easy fork on d5 if he just pushes. Then yeah, and that's what Hans does. He just pushes his pawn one more. And then bishop retreats, trying to trade pieces, which is what Magnus Carlsen tries to want here. And then Hans just snatches that free pawn on a4, and here Hans is just up a clear pawn. Then c6 here comes in, trying to trade a flank pawn for a central pawn. Hans is trying to reroute his knight so he can maybe launch an attack from the queen side. And here I think Magnus is trying to like build up his bishop so he can put a diagonal on that king. And Hans is just invoking a trade here just to get his bishop out because he doesn't want that nasty knight just going everywhere. And they do trade pieces here, but here he trades with the pawn instead of with the knight because because I don't really know why here. I think he just trades with his pawn because he thought he had enough defense, and if he wants to break through, he needs like a lot of force. Oh. Then both players just trade pawns, opening up the c file to the king, so that knight here is pinned. They both trade flank for center pawn. f5 comes in, taking over the center again. And then Hans Niemann is trying to run his king to a2, so then he can like push his pawns, and he's like really safe there. There's like no threats from black. So this move is to, if you move the f pawn up one, then it's like a check, like something of that sort, like a discovered check. Oh. Oh, you can do that. So what Magnus Carlsen does here is that he moves the bishop here. So then if that pawn moves up forward, then it's a discovery check. Then Hans just moves his rook. So then it would be a nasty discovered move. So then to the queen, so he can do some nasty damage there. And then the queen moves. And Hans gets his king to safety. And that bishop is like really just staring across the board. It could be really helpful to Magnus. And look at that dual bishop right there. It's like the dual like it looks like lasers just looking across the board, because like they're like kind of important, but like it looks like there should be some kind of attack with the rook on the a file with the queen coming in and the two bishops just looking across, but there's actually no attack here. There's no threat for Hans. Then rook to e1 is to stack the queen and the rook. And the knight goes to attack the rook. The rook just simply moves. The bishop goes back. The the knight just retreats to f1. And here, Hans just wants to trade pieces, getting that white diagonal of that white squared bishop, like staring across the board. And this is like crazy here. This is like elite level chess. Look at this pin. I mean, look at this attack to the queen. Magnus has no choice to but to trade with the queen and with the rook. And because I think Magnus thought that it was kind of a fair trade to do that. And all of a sudden, Hans is actually winning the game. Like this is all crazy, and like it's not getting that crazy yet. But these pawns are just marching up the board. Hans can't really do nothing because it's a 2 pawn, a 3 pawn kind of versus 1. Look at those pawns just marching up the board. They trade pawns. The rook comes in, and that pawn's completely safe. And Hans wants that pawn on the b file to go up, and there it just marches up the board. And Hans ends it in style by not just moving the queen, but sacrificing the queen. And then here, Magnus Carlsen can't really do nothing here. It's 2 pawns versus 1 rook. And here, Magnus Carlsen resigns the game, an epic moment. An epic moment because here Magnus Carlsen can't do anything. Even if he sacrifices, 1 pawn just goes up, and it's already a queen versus a bishop and a king, since the black king will probably take the knight. So that's it for y'all. So we're gonna be moving on for our next game, So let's just go back, all the way back. So this game also starts off with e4, e5. But this time, Hans on Twitch is black. So in the previous game, Hans was white, but on this game, Hans is black. So let's see how this game turns out, unlike the other one. Because this time Hans is black, and last time he won with white. So this is kind of the same. This is the bishop's opening because the bishop gets out before the knight. This is to attack the e pawn, the central pawn, d3, c5. This is all normal moves. Just developing pieces. Both players are just developing pieces in this situation. This is a very common pawn structure. This is not a very normal move. I mean, like, it gets the queen out. It can get the queen out at any moment. Bishop to b3. I'm trying to avoid pawn to d5. Castle. And then these are all normal moves. H3 is to prevent knight to g4. A5. And Hans is kind of playing like Magnus Carlsen. This is exactly what Magnus Carlsen plays. And both players just develop their pieces. This pawn's defended by the rook. It's just marching in, nothing is stopping it. The bishop just retreats. D5 is what happens next. It's like a pretty common move. Attack the center. b6, and Hans is just creating a very a pawn attack on the queen side, and knight to g3, and Hikaru is putting a lot of pressure on the king. He can just hop in at any moment, and here Hans just takes, opening up the center, and the queen has that deadly is staring right down the d file. The bishop now comes in. Now that is a free pawn officially. The a4 pawn is actually a free pawn now. Once the queen moves, and now that pawn is completely free. And that pawn doesn't get taken for a long time. And both players just play the game normally. My bad. If you guys are getting disturbed by me moving the thing, it's my mistake. So my bad. So both players just make an attack. Here Hikaru is making a very deadly king side attack. But there's nothing to worry about here. Everything is protected. And now Hans is the one who's coming in now. With the things. Here, if you're wondering why the king couldn't take the bishop, the queen from the other side of the board is looking at it, protecting it. Here is an offer of bishops, and Hans retreats his queen and attacks the knight, and this is a knight for rook. So the knight takes the rook, and the bishop takes the bishop. And here, Hikaru, instead of saving his rook, he decides to save his knight. The only reason is because that's attacking the rook on a8. They trade. They don't trade rooks yet. Instead of Hikaru snatching that second rook, he just recaptures the bishop, and then now they trade pieces, rook for rook, and actually here Hans is actually winning. He's up a knight, if you're wondering, and they're just shuffling their pieces. Hans moving his knight in, and this is like climatic here. This is climatic stuff. Holy. That queen getting that deadly diagonal. Hans is just snatching all their pawns. Like, would you look at that? And here Hikaru resigns because Hikaru can't do anything of Hans just snatching all of his pawns. So here Hikaru resigns, and Hans does the historic moment of beating Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru in a row. This is not a feat that many people in this world did before. So we're gonna be moving on to our next game in a bit. So see you in like 2 seconds.
So this is when Magnus Carlsen gets his revenge. So his revenge starts off with the exact same starting, which is e4, e5, but this one quite doesn't go into the Italian, but it goes into the knight's opening. So then we got bishop to c4, and this is the Italian, my bad guys. And then this does go the normal way. And by the way, if you're wondering, Magnus Carlsen is black and Hans is white. So d3, common move here. I'm trying to get the dark squared bishop out. And this game is actually a really nice game. Magnus Carlsen gets his revenge, and it's a really like it's symmetrical kind of. The only difference is that the d pawn is up for white. So h3 is what white plays, and then d6, and then c3. This is all normal moves. The white is trying to put the knight on d2. This knight here, right here, it's trying to go to d2. Well, that's at least what most players play. So a6 is just a common move, maybe to attack the bishop, but also if this knight was on the c3 square, then it would also have hopped on to b5, which is actually a very big threat. Rook to e1 to centralize the rook. h6 um is to prevent knight to going to g5, and the point of putting the pawns forward is to block these kind of knights to go forward and create some kind of problem. So a4 is to stop this pawn advancing to b5. a7 is a pretty good move because you don't want this pawn going up and trapping your bishop. b4 is to restrict this bishop from coming out again, and that bishop has a really good diagonal across here, but white could easily cut it off. e7 is to prevent like the pawn attacking the knight and driving it everywhere and maybe even getting it trapped. And look at Hans, like he's literally just charging his pawns up the board. Like on the queen side, all the pawns are not like this is the only pawn that's like kind of back. Like all of these pawns are just charging up the board. So the next one is knight to g6, and the point of players playing knight right in front of the king is to maybe like hop in, like the knights to hop in the game to attack the king, because the knights don't have like far range, but if they're close to the king they can do a lot of damage because they can hop over pieces. And the bishop just goes back. The rook, Magnus centralizes his rook. Bishop to d2, as I said earlier, this is the whole point of putting the pawn here. And this pawn is like the point of this pawn is to, this pawn here is blocking the bishop's diagonal, and this pawn is protecting these two pawns, and it is basically like the structure of this pawn structure right here. So c6 to like just stop Hans's pawn attack. c2, this bishop would like a more diagonal. It's kind of trapped in this position, but it might be more useful later on. This queen is probably going here, maybe like because it wants to support these pawns a little or something like that, or Magnus just wants to um Magnus just wants to uh, get his queen out if the pawns trade. So knight goes back, hoping to hop on the g3 square. a5. This pushes the pawn up one, and this might disrupt Hans's pawn structure. But this also might open up the b file, which might be good for Hans. And then they trade pawns. The queen comes in now. And as I said earlier, the knight hops onto the g3 square. And like if you see here, all the pieces are trying to attack the white king, and all the white pieces are trying to attack the black king. That's the whole point of this position right here. Bishop to d2. If you move the pawn up, then it attacks the queen, which might be good for like a fork of the queen and something else. Queen to c7, just moving it out of this like diagonal. And these moves are just to centralize the rooks. And these are all pretty good moves. The queen goes here to support the bishop in this diagonal. And rook to a8 is a move to maybe gain an extra pawn. And all these pieces, like Magnus probably offers repetition here. And in this tournament, Magnus is actually doing really good. He ends off with a 10.5 out of 11, which is a near perfect score, and it's really good for any tournament. And that's how Magnus gets his payback. That's what Hans did last title Tuesday. He got a 10.5 out of 11, and Magnus got a 10. So if Magnus won that game, then he would have gotten a perfect score. So Magnus Carlsen here gets his revenge, and he actually beats Hans on Twitch here. So he gets a near perfect score. So moving on to the game again, the queen goes to b2. This is all normal stuff to centralize the rooks. Black's aim is to go from this side maybe because all of white's pieces are actually starting to go all here, and there's a lot of pressure on this side. But for some reason, it actually looks kind of organized. If you kind of look at it, it's kind of like symmetrical on the side of the thing. So, anyways, queen goes to a3, protecting this pawn along with the bishop. There's nothing. These are all pretty good moves. There's nothing. Repetition is offered. Hans declines. They both trade pawns. Uh, Hans gets an extra pawn or an extra two pawns, but he trades out the queen, and this is all pretty good trades. Um, this pawn is looking very deadly, going almost to the end, and this is all pretty good here. Magnus just snatching some free pawns. The knight just hopping in. Magnus is putting a lot of pressure in this position. He's bringing his rook into the game, his knight. Yeah, this is like a really good position. But the good thing for Hans is that he has two rooks versus one and a queen, and he has a knight, and a bishop, which can do a lot of damage. So that's a bad thing. But Magnus holds on, and um, here, Hans sacrifices a knight because if the rook takes, then this is a very deadly attack. Um, Rook to d8, which you probably already seen, so there's no reason for me to explain that. They trade rooks in this position. Now it's a queen versus a rook, a bishop, and a knight. It's a queen and a knight versus a rook, a bishop, and a knight, which is actually not good for Magnus since there's multiple pieces against two, like 3 versus 2, which is not good. But he also has an outside pass pawn, which can actually promote into a queen, which would be really helpful. And white just bombards black with their pieces, and here Hans just sacrifices a knight, and I think that was a really big blunder, and that's why Hans resigns in this position. So that's it for you guys today, and see you next time. And hope you guys have a great day.